If you would like to get a slice of the action yourself, make sure you head to playgwent.com, where you can download the game for free, and make sure you're following Gwent Masters on Twitter to keep up with all the news from the competitive scene. But we're just about to head into game. Let's get this one underway. Alright, so it looks like we'll be kicking off with Emir under the control of Game King, and JJ leading off with his King Bran. What do you think of this matchup initially?
It's interesting because this is a deck you don't normally see in ladder. I mean, this is a curse deck. It came out in this patch. It's not something that you really expected last patch at all. It was kind of a dead archetype or not played as much, especially at the highest level, really. So this isn't going to be a standard King Bran deck. It's going to be a curse deck, which has a lot of very interesting cards like that new card Herald, which is going to be really explosive, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is two incredibly powerful decks going up. We're seeing a couple of similarities, like Muzzle making an appearance in opening hands, but then you see the individual power pieces of each deck. You see Iris sitting in Game King's hand, and those really fierce Harpooners, and Armor Smiths sitting in JJ's hand. Now, I know JJ's list tends to cater a little bit towards, more towards those Armor Smiths with his weather targeting, but against an Emir, you've got to think, actually, you know, weather targeting isn't what he needs, right? He needs to be going pure power. So to see him keep two in the hand at the beginning, it's kind of an interesting decision.
We do see some value from those Enforcers pinging the units. They're just going to get some value from those heals. But like we said, Armor Smith are more tech towards maybe Game King's Broover and Game King's Aerodin list, which do have that weather. That's going to be constant damage, and it's going to give a lot of value to Armor Smiths, like you said. Yeah,
absolutely. One of the interesting decisions for JJ here is with Morkvarg in hand and Crack available, that Crack is going to be hitting a non-Morkvarg target, which I believe will be the Olgierd. So that's kind of a nice little dual setup there. You basically get Crack to bring out whatever you don't have in hand, and then you can very quickly establish your double carryover at the start of a round.
And we see JJ giving a lot more importance to carryover and not running a card like Jengi, for example, which is, it's been pretty much just a solid card that you always run with these Crack decks, so you can create a huge tempo swing with the Jengi, with the Berserkers, for example, but we don't see Jengi, we don't see Berserkers. So a very focused list from JJ, really just focusing on some very essential aspects and not so much just a point generation with cards like Jengi, for example.
Yeah, and I really love the inclusion of the brand new Harald Houndsnout card in this deck. Harald Houndsnout is a crazy card that spawns his 3 Skull Companions, but what one of them does is when it dies, it strengthens something on your side of the board. So when you're focusing in on a unit like these Armor Smiths, it just adds so much value in terms of tempo, especially when you're bringing them out over and over. It's a really, really great new card that we can see here. But Vanimar is actually going to be applying Frost, so JJ's plan may go better than expected.
Because Game King won the coin flip, he has a chance to play these very low tempo plays like Vanimar Frost and really set up for a very long round, and also synergize with cards like Iris, for example, and you can really damage that and try and ping that off early with the Enforcers, for example. So that's probably the reason because why would he play that Vanimar so early? He doesn't really need the tempo immediately because he won that coin flip and he has that going for him.
Yeah, it's a great position to be in, to be able to play slightly more like utilitarian plays instead of having to rely on the pure tempo. But JJ has a couple of interesting options here because, of course, he wants to get that Morkvarg on the board, right? And actually, he wants to let that Frost damage tick down a little bit further because every tick of Frost is actually just adding value to those Armor Smiths. But this Frost is going to be going 50-50 on the Morkvarg and the Olgierd now, so it'll be interesting which one it goes for. He wants it to hit Olgierd, because next turn, if it hits Olgierd, it's going to establish more value on those upcoming Armor Smiths.
And we mentioned no weather in Emir, but we're seeing weather right off the bat. We see a Frost coming down, just giving that Armor Smith some extra value and also giving those Enforcer pings to help as well. So Armor Smiths will find decent amount of value. Maybe the first one, second one, maybe not so much, because obviously a card that the more you have, the less value they have in total. So it's not ideal to have, you know, many in hand, but I think JJ's still pretty happy with these tech choices.
Yeah, one of his techs that I find really interesting that I can tell you more about because of my Powers of Prophecy, also known as the deck list printed off in front of me, is JJ is running Royal Decree. And he actually has a couple of interesting targets for this. His other 2 golds are Madman Lugos and Burner Bran. What do you think about Burner Bran in a deck like this?
It's a card that's seen a lot of play in veteran decks because it has that veteran tag as well, so it's a gold that rises up in power and creates a weather effect that's pretty strong when paired with a 3 strength body, but obviously with like a 7 or 8 strength body, it's much better. But it's interesting he included in this deck that doesn't have that veteran synergy and just has the cursed units. Maybe he just really values that weather coming in, and maybe as a surprise factor as well. People don't really expect a Burner Brand in a crack deck, I think, so maybe that's the main reason. But in general, I think it's going to find decent amount of value, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really great example of like just an awesome tournament inclusion, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to throw a Skellige Storm in my deck, and it's going to catch people by surprise. Like we saw Freddy really nearly lose the series to lack of weather clears, but he managed to pull through in the end. But yeah, I like it as a surprise. And here's that Armor Smith coming down for a big bump of value.
Exactly. With Burner Brand, we saw here Vanimar coming down, pulling down Frost right off the bat, and Game King doesn't have any more weather clears, so it's pretty much a bamboozle effect where you have this card that you don't really expect the Skellige deck to run. If it was a card like maybe Golden Weather and a Scoia'tael Broover deck, you would expect it, but a card like Burner Brand, I think a surprise factor adds a lot to the value of that card.
Yeah, it's really, really great, especially, you know, when you're going into the matchup, you're going to be mulliganing away those weather clears, so then when Birna comes out, you're probably going to be pretty surprised. But the Nilfgaard Spies engine can't be underestimated, but JJ's actually in a pretty great position, you know. Significantly 20-plus point lead, or it was a 20-plus point lead, but now the Enforcer's down. And yeah, it's really, honestly, it's a great position for JJ to be in.
Yeah, Emissary, a card that it does so many things, has so much synergy with the spy units, and it also thins out your deck and, you know, cycles through your deck a lot, where you can get those guaranteed top 3, the round 3 top decks, which is, you know, fantastic for a deck like Ymir, and why it's one of the reasons it's so strong. The Emissaries, of course, you want to really chain them to get the full effect and try and get those Enforcers and the Imperial Brigades out immediately, and really have that ramp up throughout the long round 1.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You actually see Game King's assets almost working against him because you have, you know, you've got an Armorsmith there racking up more and more value as that Morkvar gets damaged. And now you've got an Imperial Enforcer pinging things down, giving the Armorsmith even more to do. So, you know, once everything has armor on, those Enforcers find it really difficult to get value. They can take out the Emissaries, you know, to allow them to Vikavara them, but you don't see any Vikavaras in Game King's hands. So JJ's got, like, actually, surprisingly, a really great board state. We're going to see that Royal Decree come down for a Lugos, which is going to be used to eliminate the Enforcer, I imagine, because he wants to stop that potential value coming out.
Yeah, Royal Decree, a card that obviously, it does a lot right. When you need a card and you really have to get that card no matter what in every single game, maybe some gold card has, you know, a big part in your game plan and your win condition as well, then you would want to run a card like Royal Decree. You have less gold in total, but it also makes your deck a lot more consistent. So, I mean, each player has to kind of see what they want to do with their deck, but it's a specific card you want to run in very specific decks, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of sort of the great golden toolbox we've seen added to the game recently. We have things like Renew, Royal Decree, you know, there's all sorts of fantastic neutral gold cards coming into the game, like Muzzle, and yeah, Royal Decree is definitely one of the most applicable of all of these, if anything, you know. Any gold that you have in a deck, Royal Decree simply makes it more reliable, which is a great thing. But the Muzzle on the Morkvarg Frost has allowed that to happen. The double muzzle. Muzzle, if you don't know, is a card that allows you to steal a bronze or silver enemy with 8 or less power. And as you just saw there, JJ said, hands off, that Morkvarg's mine.
Exactly. Muzzle's a card that when it was announced, it was many people I think underrated it, thought it wasn't going to be as important. Maybe, you know, a card similar to Eskel, a neutral card that has, you know, decent value. It can find a spot in some decks as a flex slot, but not much more than that. But we can see that Muzzle has a lot more effects than that, and being able to steal a carryover unit is absolutely huge, especially a card like Morkvarg, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that was a real sort of, you know, Game King probably thought that Frost had been doing amazing work, and then when JJ's Muzzle came out, I imagine it was slightly disheartening. But Muzzle actually has a bunch of really interesting applications in this, right? Like being able to steal, like, well, it can actually bounce an Iris back, for instance.
And Vikavara Medic also an essential part of this, of the Ymir game plan, being able to get those emissaries and cycle them once again, not only having, it's pretty much not limiting your deck to having just 3 emissaries, but instead being able to res them and play them multiple times, especially with the synergy with the Enforcers as well, allows you to thin your deck quite a bit and cycle it and really get to the very end of your deck and get all those, you know, cards like Drakeem and Rainfarm, for example, for that round 3 finish.
Here we go, but like we've mentioned with Game King's strategy working against him, you can see in Game King's face the surprise there as the second Armorsmith comes down and restores that Morkvarg back up to full, giving JJ a 26-point lead. Even an Iris is 25, so this is going to require at least a couple of cards from Game King.
Yeah, you said it yourself, the surprise factor. Same as Birna Brand, running more than one Armorsmith in a Skellige deck, especially decks like King Brand that are very meta, and even these curse decks isn't the most common thing. I think if Game King would see a third Armorsmith, he would really lose his mind quite a bit, because it really is a big surprise, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really huge, and especially when you've got those reses there, you know, he's got the Priestess of Freya, he's got the Restore. Restore you're typically going to want to see on something else, but he's got the power to play those. You know, I actually spoke to JJ at the hotel yesterday about these Armorsmiths, and he said, if everything went to plan and I needed it, I could probably get up to about 10 Armorsmiths. So he is very, very invested in this card for the deck, and rightfully so, because it does absolute work.
Yeah, Game King just clawing back in. Obviously, he has big swings with this spy. The synergy between all these cards can create huge tempo, especially in the long round one where you have, you know, all these spies. We see many spies on Super JJ's board already, and every bronze card you play after this is going to get a ton of points as well, especially the Imperial Brigades, for example. So I think Game King not too worried about this point gap right now.
Yeah, one of the cards that we're not seeing put to use yet is the Clan Brockfire Archer, those 8-pointers sitting there. They don't have so many applications in this one. You know, JJ's not really using them to line too much up. What do you see him putting these to use in later?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, they're decent value. 11-point bronzes aren't bad. They have some utility as well, being able to kill certain units that are 1 strength, or even, you know, line up for certain things like Scorch or Ignia, although JJ doesn't run any of that, so it doesn't matter too much. But in general, I think it's just the standard point value and the fact that it has the officer tag as well, which helps with the battle maidens as well. So
yeah, and speaking of a crazy card, I mentioned that I love the inclusion of this one. Harold Houndsnout spawning Wilfred, Wilhelm, and Vilmar on the opposite row, although Wilfred and Wilhelm, of course, go on your side of the board. Now, putting these in weather is really smart because these skulls do things when they die. They have varying effects, but you need them to be killed, and the Brockvar archers are good for pinging it away. Well, I believe it's actually a revenge effect, which I think only procs on their turn, if I'm correct. So this is an interesting one, although he does burn it to deny the Brockvar killing it and getting the effect out, so really nice target. But Rainfarn coming out, that's a finisher you want to see later on, right?
yeah, it's not something you normally expect. I mean, a card like, for example, Vilgefortz is a card that does a lot right in the right situations. If you find a low target, you get the good RNG, you draw the card you want, it can create a huge point cap. If you don't have a good target, if you have, you know, just a high strength target, you top deck in round 3, and you don't draw the card you want, it can't be as, you know, it's not as good. Kind of like Dijkstra in a way, but maybe not, you know, as heavy on the RNG side. But it's a card that worked well for Game King, I think. It wasn't too bad playing that Cancerella out.
Yeah, I was talking about Houndsnout's skull strengthening a random unit. Well, it hit exactly what JJ wants. It hit one of those armor smiths, which allows him to resurrect them for really high value, 10 res every time he brings that armor smith out. So that's one of the cores of this deck, and it's a really, really nice one to be fair. But yeah, I actually really love the Vilgefortz play there, denying the skull value.
Although the fact that it brought Cancerella out is a big, big misstep for Game King because of the carryover that Super JJ does have on his side of the board. You'll have those Morgthog and Olgierd coming up in round 2, and that means that there isn't a dry pass possible for Game King if he can win this in one card, which means card advantage will be a big issue for round 3.
Yeah, it really hurts his Menno value as well. He needs to be getting an Infiltrator onto a big target to get the same amount of value that he'd get from Mennoing that Cancerella. Menno Cancerella classic Nilfgaard combo coming out at 19 points, now denied to him. He's just going to go for a Nausicaa instead.
But is the Nausicaa enough? Here we have the Enforcer King as well, so that's the synergy that we talked about before with the Enforcers. Obviously, with any bronze card, you can really create a lot of points.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going into the next round without that Cancerella and with the carryover from Skellige. Game King is looking to be in a relatively rough position. He doesn't have the natural answer that Nilfgaard would be able to use in this situation.
This is one of the reasons you want Cancerella for round 3. It pretty much just plays around that carryover and counters it totally. But in this we see now in the situation, there's a lot of carryover on JJ's side, and Game King can't really play Cancerella and her Spy to get that back. So, I mean, it's really tough you can't dry pass here, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really, really difficult, of course. Well, there's the advantage of JJ, you know, will have to win this round, which means he goes first next round. So Game King can still hold on to, you know, the final card advantage, but it's still a big, big problem not being able to get that advantage back.
Yeah, basically it's going to be like even cards. He could have gone a card up into round 3 if he had that Cancerella combo for this round. Unfortunately, he doesn't, although, I mean, it does give him the power to really control the round 2 and round 3, so that is a positive for him. So it's not all lost for Game King, but he could have really squeezed out, I think, JJ quite a bit more in this round 2.
Yeah, it's far from lost. Whenever you have an Iris and a Nausicaa Brigade singing in your hand, you can't be too upset. In addition to Joachim and Menno, who are just huge finishers, he has the Infiltrator to set up the Menno on whatever he wants. So honestly, it's a really... Game King is just in such a nice position in terms of having multiple options for power spiking, right? But it looks like Keliak's going to bring down an Emissary, which will bring out a Brigade. So Game King looking to bleed a little bit this round.
Yeah, I mean, so what you want to do with this deck that thins so much and cycles your deck so much, and you have the guaranteed finishers with a card like Joachim and Iris, for example. You really want to go into a short round 3 where you can really burst fire your way with these huge tempo swings and just, you know, obliterate your opponent, because you normally have, you know, Emir Spies. It's a deck that has very, very strong finishers compared to the rest of the meta, and I think he's okay with going to a very short round 3 where you can really show that.
Yeah, and he's just dropping down to Clan Brockvar Archer. A little bit of a delay from JJ here. He's saying, you know, I don't want to commit my real guns. I'm just going to drop this, kind of feel you out, see if you want to play another card or not, because Game King, while he has options to spend, you know, theoretically he could even go up to spending like the Joachim, the Infiltrator. He doesn't want to, right? He wants to get to that like really powerful like 3 or 4 card Nilfgaard level where you can go into things like Joachim, Iris, Nausicaa, Menno. It's so great, but JJ's actually in a fairly similar playstyle, right? He still wants to go for the big power spike reses.
Exactly, this is a classic bleed, I think, from Game King. He really is just trying to trade his lower value cards for JJ's higher value cards. JJ knows this and plays, you know, obviously an Archer, hurting your own unit, not the greatest thing in the world. And I think he's just getting rid of his maybe less useful cards and trying to hold on to, like you said, his better finishers for round 3.
Yeah, there we go. And it looks like we're going to be going equals on 5 cards apiece into round 3, although of course Super JJ does have that carryover of the Olgierd and the Morgthog, which will help him out a little bit. And he also has some very nice cards in hand, like Whale Harpooner, double Priestess of Freya, and Restore, and a Skjal. So that Skjal is actually probably going to work really nicely with that Battle Maiden.
Yeah, Skjald's a great card. I mean, it's a tutor that brings out a cursed unit, and it can, end up being a lot of points if you get the right unit in the right situation. So I think JJ's pretty happy with it. A bit of RNG, so you can't really decide what you're going to get most of the time. But in the end, I think if you deck build correctly, you can always guarantee you're going to get a fairly consistent result with it. So I think it's a great inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, one of JJ's alternate game plans here does revolve around using those Clan Brockfire archers, ping up a few units, get them damaged, and then bring out a Berserker Marauder, right? So we may see him trying to get some damage units on the board first, but unfortunately he's in a bad position to do that. He'd be losing a ping off the archer. So there's the Berserker Marauder coming out. So what we're probably going to see, Clan Brockfire, he can delay a little bit, then Battle Maiden, bring out another Marauder. It's a really, really powerful play.
Exactly. Marauder is pretty much just serving as a synergy with Battle Maiden to get that next Marauder out and at the end of round 3 basically to get a lot of points. A 10 strength Marauder, not the greatest thing, but he's going to get higher strength ones later on, so I think he's not too sad about that right now.
Yeah, and also remember he can res that 10 strength Armor Smith to heal up anything that is damaged, even after playing the big one. So we're seeing the Imperial Force come down, trying to chip away at the health of that, but he does have that super powered Armor Smith in his graveyard available for resurrections.
Yeah, and these Enforcers are cards you normally see in round 1 because they do have that synergetic effect with Spies where over a long round they can generate a lot of points because of the Emissaries and because of the rest of the Spies and Infiltrator tags, for example, that you play. But in a short round, normally not as effective, although this round isn't too short, so I think it'll still find pretty much average bronze value, maybe a little bit better. Especially with Iris there, it can really combo with it well.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of nice things. He can play it on, he can shoot from Joachim, he can shoot from Iris. So there's a couple of shots available. That's going to put the Enforcer around 12 value, which is quite a sort of standard value from a bronze these days. So, it's by far a dead card. But what he does have now is Super JJ is getting out some really nice potential for Armor Smiths here. That 7 strength will jump right back up to 11, I believe. And the 12 strength will go to 13 as well. So immediately, he's got an additional 5 value. That's a 16-point res if he res it with a Freya.
Exactly. And we just saw this Battle Maiden here. It has a great effect. It's really hard that I think Skellige was missing this tutor card that can really thin out your deck and bring out cards you need when you need them. And I think it was a great addition this last patch, and I think a lot of players have noticed that and have included it in pretty much every single Skellige deck just to add a bit more consistency to pretty much every deck. I mean, King, Brand, Cursed, we're seeing it pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And he didn't quite get this opportunity this round, but it's a fantastic restore target as well. And actually, I say that it's now been shot, so he can restore it, which is really, really nice for JJ. But yeah, that Battle Maiden is just wonderful. When you get it coming out at 8 base strength and it drags along its Marauder friend with her, it is really, really scary indeed. So JJ, unfortunately, he now has the Disloyal tag. He knows what's going to happen to that Marauder, so don't expect to see a heal go on that because he knows it's just going to get tanked anyway.
And like you said, Restore, a card that also got nerfed or changed in this last patch. It wasn't really, it used to be 10 points and pretty much any unit, and now it only restores up to 8 points and only Skellige units. So it really closed down the possibilities of that card a bit, but it's still, I think, very, very strong in the right hands. And it works very well with cards like Freya, with Battle Maidens, and also with Gremist, for example.
Yeah, and we just saw the frustration on Game King's face. He knows that by eliminating that Battle Maiden, it was a really, really, I think he's regretting that decision somewhat now because he did open up that huge restore play. As soon as he saw the restore come out, we saw Game King wince because it's a big amount of points, right? That was what, 22 value, 1 more damage, so 21 value initially, but he now has 2 wounded units to heal, one of which is going to get a big bump without adding to the Menno value.
And we see Joachim probably coming out immediately here, and it's a big point swing. It also opens up to a Coral, for example, but JJ isn't running Coral, so it's not going to be as effective here. Guardian as well in round 3, not so great. Its effect really works in round 1 where you have to draw cards later on in round 2 and 3 and you can't really mulligan them. Here Guardian probably won't die, and probably its effects won't really trigger or affect the game at all, so not the greatest thing here for Game King, I think.
Yeah, its effect's not going to go off, but it's still a big body for Joachim to hit, right? Giving it 16 points of value, which is actually pretty decent, Yeah, the effect's not going off, but it's a decent target. It doesn't open up a better Menno opportunity, but it's not like you just hit a dead Vicavaro or something, so it's a decent amount of points on the board.
We still see a very big point gap though between JJ and Game King. Menno here, a card that also, it kills pretty much any spying unit, like we saw the tag there on the Marauder, and it also thanks to the Infiltrator, and that makes it so that it can create a 20-point swing for a gold card. Not too shabby, also synergizes with cards like Enforcers and the Imperial Brigade, so I think Game King's pretty happy with the inclusion of that gold card in his deck, but we still see a pretty big point cap here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think JJ actually... it's always a risky business calling games early, but we can actually figure out how much Game King has, right? He's got 34 points. He's got 9 Strength Nausicaa Brigade because it'll destroy Iris, 25 points from Iris, 34 points. Is that enough to overcome?
It's tough to call, and I have to see the Freya res and what it ends up pulling here. But I mean, it's really close. JJ just had a really big gap from the start. Iris, a card that once killed, it will boost 5 units on the opponent's side by 5 units by 5 points. It's a really big swing. I mean, especially in decks that synergize well with it, like the Spy deck that gets boosted by the Spy tag as well. So I think Game King, it's a great card to have in round 3, but it might just not be enough here to win it. It's just too big of a point.
I think it's going to be super close. JJ doing the quick maths in his head, but I think with an Armor Smith, it will be enough. He knows he can't stop the Iris dying. He knows Nausicaa does way too much damage to prevent that, but he's got an Olgierd to heal with an Armor Smith. Is there anything stronger that he could res out here?
I think it'll be enough with pretty much anything here. I mean, there's just really, there's a total of 25 points going to Game King's side, plus the 9 coming down from the Nausicaa Brigade, and I think it's just not enough. It's too many points.
It's not enough, but it is a very close finish to this game. JJ taking the first victory in what is actually a pretty monumental win for him, because I mean, realistically, he just went first and beat what many people regard as one of the strongest decks, so fantastic win for him.
Yeah, especially in this new system where you would, if you lose the first coin flip, you go second, you go first or you go second in the next game. So he knows he has that advantage going into the game 2. It's really just a big swing for him. I think just mentally being able to win against Ymir, having lost the coin flip with a deck that people maybe don't consider to be tier 1 like Curse, because it's really a new deck that just came into this patch now. So I think he's really happy with that win, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that JJ is going to be very pleased with himself, especially now that he knows that that's kind of like one of the awkward victories out the way, right? His brand isn't a deck that targets. You know, Game King can still stick on his Emir, but he can't do it forever. So JJ now knows that he's won with his brand. He now has his target deck. So realistically, a large portion of the remaining matchups are going to be in his favor.
Yeah, we see Henselt and Airden that both have huge weather clears with the Archgriffins, with the Sergeants as well. And I think we're going to go straight into game 2 now and see how the action unfolds.
All right, here we go. It looks like we have Game King sticking on Emir, as I expected. You know, very powerful deck. Going up against JJ's Monsters. Let's see if JJ can avoid the famously difficult Monsters mulligan.
Yeah, it's always tough, especially with the Frost in the deck. It's a deck that normally you high roll a lot with it. It can get you really good results if you get a good hand, but if you get a bad hand with a lot of bricks, it can create a bit of a nightmare for you. So I think in general it looks pretty decent here. So I think JJ can't complain too much. And we also saw that Game King does have the Guardian round 1 this time around, so I think he's pretty happy about that as well.
Yeah, we also know that Game King is running Vanamar, so a lot of these Frosts may get dismissed by Vanamar. So really cool card for Game King in this matchup. We also see the theme of JJ's weather targeting coming through with those Archgriffin inclusions. Vanamar is in Game King's hands, so he does have a pretty nice answer to these Hounds. But there's a lot of tempo that we see here. You know, he can reapply Frost with Caranthir. He's got the Crones, he's got Iris, he's got Gels. There's a lot of good cards in JJ's hand here.
Yeah, we did see 2 Archgriffins in his hand at the start of the mulligan, but he also mulliganed one away because obviously Emir not known as a big weather deck. We did see that Van Hemer with the Frost the last game, but even then I think in general Archgriffins won't be super valuable against this deck, so you normally want to mulligan them away and try and get your better value bronze cards like those Hounds that can pull out Frosts, and also those Drowners that synergize with said Frosts.
Yeah, really interested to see the inclusion of Crones here as well. Crones, a mainstay of competitive Gwent from an era long gone, but they're making a return right now in JJ's deck. What do you think about the inclusion here?
I mean, it's interesting. If you have the silver slots and you really want to have that, tempo swing that you can pretty much, pull out of nowhere from your deck, like we see here right at the start of the game. Especially with the coin flip in your favor, it really helps a lot to get that tempo going immediately. And it doesn't really have any requirements like other cards that require you to build a deck around them, or maybe just have a two card setup to get that tempo out. Crones, pretty much you just play a Crone, hope you don't get more than 1 in hand, and you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. They are famously one of the killers of the Monsters mulligan. Myself having drawn many double Crones in my time. But JJ does manage to pull off the Crones opener very smoothly, but it provides a maximum value target for Muzzle, making it a 16-point play by Game King here.
Yeah, it's something that Muzzle, it does well. You can either get utility from it, or you can just get the standard 16 points from it, which is for a gold is pretty decent, I think. I mean, it's become, I think, standard now. There's obviously golds that get a lot more cards like Menno, cards like Igni that can swing for a lot of points. But in general, 16 points for a gold, I think, is fairly standard, and I think you can't be too sad about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a decent little bit of value from him as we see both players considering their next moves in this wonderful panning shot. But back in game, we have JJ. Honestly, he knows Game King, right? These guys play together a lot. They're friends. They talk about the game a lot. He knows Game King will have tried to get that Vanamar in his hand. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him reluctant to commit too many Frosts right now. do you think this is immediately cleared, or do you think Game King waits for more frost to come out and then clears it?
I think Game King knows that this Aerodin deck has at least 4 to 5 weathers in total, so he really wants to get at least 2 clears is the very minimum, and you need at least 2 clears. Super JJ can just, not play any more frost now and let that 1 frost get maximum damage over the rest of this turn. But in general, you want to wait for at least 2 weathers on your row, especially if you know that your opponent plays a deck that has a lot of weather guaranteed.
Yeah, it's kind of the interesting thing though, isn't it, right? Like even 1 frost, that's 2 points a turn. That's a significant impact on the game state. So it's almost like this little mind game of like, how much weather can I play without you clearing it? And I'm just going to leave it there and let it do its work, because an uncounted weather, even 1 row in a long round, is going to add a lot to JJ's like tempo.
Exactly. When you play a card like Ragnarok, for example, it's easy to clear it because you just can't. You have to clear it now. If you have to clear, and that's it. But when it's 1 single row of frost, you really don't know if it's correct to clear now, if it's correct to wait. So it is, like you said, a big mind game for Game King, and he's really gonna have to wait it out, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. However, JJ does not have his armor smiths now to repair the dents that those crossbow bolts are putting in his crones, so those enforcers playing into them gets really dangerous. If you're playing into a couple of enforcers and the Game King just took Keliak back into his hand, there's a strong chance he can emissary out another enforcer. So playing into the double enforcer tempo like that is really dangerous, and Game King is positioning them very well. He's acknowledging there's a frost on the board, so he's saying, okay, I'm not going to give you the opportunity to move this into weather with a Drowner and kill the card. I'm just going to stick it in the frost and let it stay for a few turns.
Exactly. Common mistake is to play outside of weather and think, oh, I'll play it outside of weather so it's not getting hit by weather every turn so it can survive for longer. But Drowner really negates that by throwing it right back into weather and just creating a lot of damage to go with it. So it's a tricky situation. You have to read the meta a lot and know that these Drowners are a big thing in these Aerodin decks and know to play around them as well.
Yeah, and JJ acknowledges Game King's reluctance to clear a single row of weather with Vanamar, and he's going to put the Wild Hunt Rider down. What the Wild Hunt Rider does is increase that frost damage to 3 points a turn, up from 2, so it actually boosts the weather on the board, and that means that Imperial Enforcer is staring death in the face because it will go down next turn.
Like you said, 2 points of turn with frost is a big deal, but 3 points is even worse. And I have to see if Game King thinks that maybe JJ doesn't have more frost and he wants to clear it now, and then JJ can answer back by playing those hounds and getting that frost out and just creating a lot of damage every single turn. So it's hard for Game King to really read this and get the right decision immediately.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough one, and he is going to put Keliak down. This does a couple of things. This allows him to Ambassador. Wow. He's going to Ambassador to boost up that Enforcer, make sure it survives the frost. He wants the points that represents on the board, and he's willing to spend his second Keliak to do so.
And that Keliak also blocks that Iris from coming down on that frost row with the Rider in place as well, and to immediately get those 25 points and create a big situation where you're so many points up and you won the coin flip, and that would be huge for JJ. So I think he's maybe looking for that situation in the next few turns.
Yeah, what a fantastic Arch Griffin here though. Not only does it give Super JJ the pass, but he also moved Game King's Emissary from his own graveyard into Game King's graveyard, meaning that Vikavaros will not resurrect it. So he's assuming that Game King will have a Vikavaro in hand. Little does he know he doesn't, but that's a really smart little play, just to deny your opponent that ease of play.
Exactly, and if he has the chance here to maybe draw 2 Vikavaros, then he has those big Vikavaros, and that is a big RNG play from Game King. But I think Game King knows his deck pretty well and knew his chances, and I think he's not going to draw into a dead card here. Reducing Imperial Brigade, which is fairly decent in round 1, gets a lot of points, and normally gets buffed to about 14 to 16 points, which is great for a bronze card.
Yeah, Imperial Brigade, really one of the powerhouses of Nilfgaard. You can get so much value from that, but Game King is actually running out of sources of spies. He's got an Infiltrator that can tag someone who's disloyal, but there's now no Emissary utility sitting in Game King's hand. He has no Emissaries, his Keliak is spent, he has no Vikavaros to bring them out, so how much more can Game King afford to commit to this round, do you think?
And we see the Iris coming down, immediately getting killed thanks to that Rider proc with the 3 damage, creating a huge point swing and putting JJ ahead on even card, which is fantastic for him.
Yeah, really great position for JJ to be in. Ahead on even cards is, that's against Nilfgaard. That's fantastic. I do think Game King has got a little unfortunate in his draws this early round. He would have liked to see more Emissary chaining. Would have liked to see, some maybe double Enforcers. That's kind of like the round 1 standard. But Game King's in a rough spot. Is this the pass, or does he continue into this?
It's going to be hard to call, really. He would have loved to have Igni in his hand right now. We see the double 13s in that range row, but unfortunately, Igni on a card you normally run in Nilfgaard. You have the great golds like Menno, like Vilgefortz, that normally get more value. In this case, maybe not. But I think Game King is in a really tough situation here. Having to lose on even is devastating, I think.
Yeah, you're so right with that Igni as well. That's always one of the most painful moments when you're playing Gwent, when you go, do you know what? If I had Igni in my deck, it would be great. But yeah, more often than not, Nilfgaard golds will be more value, but he actually bounces back. He bounces back the Iris. He returns his own Iris. He goes, okay, you spend your Iris, I'm going to play mine. this is normally something you see as a finisher from Nilfgaard, just immediately sort of countering with the same play. Is spending a lot, right? This is an expensive play for Game King, especially when another card would be required to take the round, and it would put Game King to -2.
Exactly. Game King now commits to going 2 cards down, which is huge in Gwent. I mean, going down 2 cards is a devastating position to be in. Sometimes you can really claw back out with a spy. We see Cantarella in his hand, so that's guaranteed. But in general, it's not where you want to be in a game like especially against a player like Super JJ that's really good and can really punish you for being 2 cards down in round 2.
Yeah, I'm really shocked to see this Iris come out. I think this is a really, really brave move by Game King. He's looking like the gambit hasn't paid off. A little bit of frustration showing in his face there, but this was a really interesting play. I mean, what does Game King do? Because this is one of the worst positions you can find yourself in Gwent. You either have to cut your losses and go to -1, or you go, well, I played the Iris, I've got to commit, and then you win the round on -2. You've got to go -2 and take the round, right?
I think if he's playing for the viewers, he's definitely going to Van Hemar overdose and try and kill that Iris with a little bit of RNG, but maybe that's not the correct line of play if he wants to really win this game here. He can just infiltrate her and create an extra spy tag to get an enforcer ping and just get the Iris off that way. A bit more boring, but I think it's the way to go if you want to try and win this game. But yeah, being 2 cards down is quite devastating for him. I think we see it in his player cam. He's not too happy with the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite the Freddy Babes, Lambert meme magic, which was absolutely fantastic to watch. He does go for the more sensible play, keeping Vanemar to counter the impending frost that he must know is coming. Guardian does its work, drawing JJ2 Guardians, but what we're going to see here is one of them mulliganed into a frost. There's that monster's mulligan striking, and we're just going to see the other one dropped as a play to take the round, really, aren't we? So, not the most damaging Guardian, but the frost draw is actually really painful for JJ.
Yeah, well, you can normally mulligan away the golems and it's normally fine, but having to draw a bad card after you mulligan is what makes the Guardian so good in round 1. It's a decent 11-point drop, and it also creates a big utility situation where you really mess up your opponent's draws, and it can it's hard to value it, how much that is in points and stats for the game, but it's gonna I think mess with JJ's plan a lot, having to draw that frost from hand.
Yeah, we see Game King playing Cantarella just to regain a little bit of his lost card advantage, set him just to -1 instead. And I imagine JJ's probably just going to reply with the Guardian, because he knows that Game King is down cards. So Game King has the choice of either going crazy and trying to just out-tempo his opponent and get that card advantage back, or passing after this. It's a rough position to be in. Game King has not set himself in a great spot for this match, especially when JJ has super powerful cards like those Slizzards sitting in his hand, waiting to pull out more Riders, because Uridin spawned a Rider that's now waiting in his graveyard.
Yeah, when you're being bled around 2, you definitely want to get rid of your useless cards, and I think Golem is one of those. A 6-point bronze that doesn't do anything at all is normally not a card you want for round 3. Not a great finisher. So I think, yeah, JJ is just going to try and play his bad cards like we said before, and Game King also wants to trade his bad cards for JJ's better cards, but JJ knows this, and he's going to try and stay ahead, obviously, but playing his worst cards.
Yeah, I expect to maybe just see the Vanilla Frost applied to the Siege Row here. JJ's not going to be spending anything too expensive. Game King trying to whittle him down, because generally, Nilfgaard with 2 cards can maybe keep up with monsters with 3 cards because of cards like Joachim and, well, normally Iris, but we've seen that spent, right? So Game King's got to whittle them down a little bit, because if you go into a long round cards down against monsters, especially when they're playing attrition damage, you're going to have a rough time, because even if you clear that weather with the Clear Skies, that's Vanemar just hitting for 3 points, right? It's not high tempo. You need points, and he's going to struggle with this now.
Also, if you go into a round 3, though, a card down, it makes it so that if you have less cards, being a card down is much more important. If you have, for example, 8 cards in round 3, and if you have 7, your opponent has 8, then you're only 1 card down, and the average in general isn't as important, I think. But if you have 2 cards and your opponent has 3, then the average in points is much higher, and it makes it much worse for you.
Yeah, we see the Egroto Doom Anima Est coming down from Vicavaro Medic, meaning wherever there's life, there's hope. There you go, that's what that means. But yeah, so we see that coming down, and he's going to be going, what is he going to go for here? Is he just going to establish double enforcers on the board? Is he going to chain emissaries? Is he going to take the Rider to deny the Slizzard target? That would be huge. Yeah,
I think he's just playing around the graveyards, trying to deny those cards that synergize with the graveyards, like the Slizzard. Obviously, a new card in this patch that does a lot of good stuff, and it's really a card that monsters needed as well. It makes the deck a lot more consistent. You can thin out cards, and I think in general, most people are pretty happy with it. Emissary, also a card that kind of thins your deck and makes your deck more consistent. These are bronze cards that don't do much by themselves, but when paired with a good deck that has a good synergy, it really makes your deck much more consistent, and it can play at a very high level if you manage to do everything the same way every game. So that's what both players are going for, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the Rider steal there. Denying those Slizzards that he knows JJ will be running is really, really great foresight shown by Game King here. But the Emissary comes down. We just saw it on the screen. It is a fantastic efficiency card. Really, you know, a lot of Nilfgaard efficiency owes itself to Emissaries. They're great, great cards. We see a Brigade, which is a nice little bit of tempo, but it's not going to be enough to put him ahead, right?
I think Game King in general isn't really thinking about points here. He's just trying to get rid of his bad cards and, you know, maybe getting rid of JJ's better cards if JJ has a lot of good cards and he wants to keep for round 3 as, you know, good finishers. So I think in general Game King knows, I mean, to get card advantage back, it's going to be incredibly hard. I mean, he has to play, you know, a card that not only beats the score, but beats JJ's next card as well, which is going to be fairly impossible considering, you know, both hands. I think Game King knows he's going to go card down, and the more he plays into this, he is bleeding JJ, but he's also creating it where there's just less cards in round 3, and, you know, you're averaging less points per card, so it's going to become a lot harder for him to claw back into the game, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, JJ has some really high value cards, right? He's got this Gels, he's got Slizzard. If they find a target to hit, they're going to be great. But Game King is, yeah, well, like, it's exactly like you say, right? He's bleeding JJ, but he's also bleeding himself into a position where he's still down cards. He doesn't have any card that can power spike enough to put him ahead significantly. His only hope is this Menno into Cantorell.
Yeah, and Gels is a card that you don't really know what he's going to pull. Most of the times you can create your deck in a way where going into round 3 you have some pretty guaranteed pulls that make him, you know, a fairly good card, kind of like Royal Decree in a way, although with a bit more synergy with cards like, for example, Toad Prince that, you know, pull the second card out, and Gils obviously pulls a gold and a silver. The card you don't pick will be top of your deck, and that synergizes really well with Toad Prince, for example, in the Monsters faction, so it's kind of a Royal Decree that's made for the Monsters faction. It has a lot of extra synergies.
Yeah, it's actually a great synergy in round 2 as well, right? Because you can put exactly what you want round 3 on top of your deck and guarantee your draw, which is really, really nice. So we see him actually opting to take the Muzzle, I believe. Could take that Imperial Brigade, it's a big hit, or Frightener for the Spy. He's going to go for the Muzzle, though. He does need to win this round. Frightener, while it would be lovely to be able to play it, there's not quite the space on the board for him to be able to do so. So he's going to take that Brigade and deny even more potential points from Game King.
Yeah, like I said before, Muzzle can be a 16-point card, but because that Brigade could grow to a higher strength value in general, it's more than 16 in the end because of the, you know, there's still a few cards left to be played in this round, and if you had more Spy synergies, it could grow to, you know, 10 or 12 points, and that not only denies that, so it's 16 points plus whatever that would have been, which could have been, you know, a 20-point gold, which is really good for a gold card in general.
Yeah, Game King is really just slamming on the tempo here, playing his Vanamar for the Overdose. We see another Frost applied now that the Clear Skies is unavailable to Game King, and that relieves him with a 19-point play. He can play 19 points by killing that Cantorella, but he's going to take 3 damage the next turn from Frost, because of course Vanamar is only 1, so we'll do 1 and 2, which is 3. And that's going to be interesting. He's 6 points down, he's going to take another 3, so this is like going to put him 10 points ahead.
So the question here is,
right?
Because Frost is so low tempo, it makes it so that Game King can catch up because of the Slizzards aren't pulling anything.
He's going to draw it. It's going to be a draw. JJ's going to take it. JJ's...
And Game King wins the game because he won the round 1.
Game King takes it. My apologies, not JJ. That's insane.
So that was a really risky play. I mean, you have to think about it. I mean, you have to know that your opponent has 3 dead cards in hand with the Frost and the 2 Slizzards, because obviously if you don't manage to get back the card advantage, you go into a short round 3 where you're a card down. Game King in the end, he really abused the fact that JJ had a very, very terrible hand, especially because he stole that Rider from JJ's graveyard.
Oh my goodness, that was an absolutely insane. Yeah, it was the Vicavaro. It was the Vicavaro that sealed the game for Game King there, taking that Rider, denying the Slizzard targets, and JJ holding on to double Slizzard in his hand just meant that the value was denied. There were 3-point cards, and losing a game on a draw to go technically 2-1 in the second round is one of the most frustrating ways to lose a game, and it showed in JJ's face there. But in a way, here's the thing. Game King now has Uridin and Bruverhoog left. These are 2 decks that like to run Weather. JJ has decks that are only using Weather Clears. So we're going to go into the next game now that JJ gets to play against the decks he's actually targeting and see how he does.
I think JJ is going to be devastated psychologically because of that, you know, round 2 draw. It's not a normal situation. I think he's, you know, maybe a bit affected by that. But like you said, I think he has the counters to the rest of Game King's decks. And in general, I think he might know this by just the leader choices. And I think he's not too worried about these next 2 games, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think that actually scoring a win against Spies, in the overall sense of the matchup, of course, because you do need to remember this is a best of 5. In the overall sense of the matchup, getting a win was pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, it's something you don't normally expect. I mean, you know Emir's going to get a win regardless because it's a very strong deck, and the fact that he got the win there, it wasn't the most, you know, normal of wins. I think he got maybe a bit shocked by the way that went, but in general you kind of expect that, especially, I mean, he was going first, he was going second though, so he had that advantage as well, so maybe he is a bit a bit affected by that. But I mean, in general, I think interesting. We see the same opening as well with the Crones. Like we explained before, a card that doesn't require any setup and creates a lot of tempo immediately.
Yeah, this is old school Crones openings. I love it. This is like, remembering the past, seeing all of these Crones tempo openers back when 20 points in one turn was considered absolutely outrageous. But yeah, this is really great to see JJ utilizing this tempo opening. It does mean that Game King does use his coin flip position to answer with a slightly lower tempo play. But this is going to be an interesting matchup. I mean, I think that the Archgriffins are there for Super JJ. I don't know if they're there for Game King. I don't believe they are, right?
No, he definitely doesn't have 3 of them. He has no Archgriffins at all, actually, so he doesn't really have much of a chance to clear that weather. I think that's going to be the big decider in this matchup in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no Archgriffins, there's no Abaya. Game King is going to be just dealing with this weather. He's got to play into it. He's got a singular Clear Skies in hand. That is the only weather clear in his deck. So that Clear Skies is representing a big lifeline for Game King right now, and he's got to use it carefully. The question is, will JJ have any idea it's coming? Because it's not a card you'd expect, right?
Yeah, you normally just want to run those Archgriffins. They have a great 8-point body, and they also synergize well with against decks like Skellige, for example, that do use that graveyard a lot. And like we saw in the last round, stealing that rider from JJ's graveyard. So they have that extra utility as well. But in general, you normally want to run Archgriffins. I think they have just a bit of added, utility in the matchup. But Clear Skies is also a good option.
Yeah, it's very interesting seeing the Clear Skies here. I wonder if it's just so perhaps he'd use it towards a rally, otherwise get a little rider out, get a drowner out or something. But yeah, it's a very interesting inclusion, the Clear Skies over the Archgriffin. Be interesting to ask Game King about that, actually. But it is going to be quite pivotal in this matchup. We see JJ's got a lot of answers to weather, and he's also got a lot of ways to apply weather. So even if that Clear Skies hits big in one round, Game King is going to suffer in future rounds with it. But initially on these hands, I kind of like JJ's position.
Yeah, Clear Skies is only really useful, I think, against Golden Weather, because it can clear all 3 rows at once. Archgriffin more targeted towards things like Frost, where it's just a single row. Although, of course, both players are going to be playing a lot of Frost, so in the end, maybe Clear Skies will be superior in this case.
Yeah, and here we see Archgriffin on the screen. So, of course, that's the card that you saw Game King using an absolutely insane clutch last game, taking that Wild Hunt Rider, denying the Slizzard target. And it also clears weather, which is another nice thing that it does. So it's a really key card in this matchup, and expect to see JJ making great use of them. Drowners are also going to be flying left, right, and center, as they do excellent damage in this type of matchup.
And we see a big point gap here already, mostly because of those Crones, I think. I mean, really in a deck that has these Hounds that play weather and aren't really high tempo at all, Crones give kind of a support, kind of a lifeline to this deck where you can play a very high tempo opening and then just play your low tempo, setup cards and setup plays throughout the next few rounds. So I think that's what JJ was really going for with these Crones, just creating a play that you can play without any questions asked round 1 and just get that 20 points immediately.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup, actually, because it's a matchup where large point gaps can be closed pretty quickly. I mean, we have things like weather ticking, which makes any point gap immediately smaller if there's units in the weather, right? And then we have drowners, which are huge value cards. We have, like, riders increasing the damage of that weather. So JJ's going to pass, and I expect to see Game King go -1 to take this, right? He could just drop a rider on the melee row and he'd take it.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't want JJ to win on even cards. He's going to go for this win here on round 1. And obviously JJ, he sees two Frost in his row. And one of the best ways to clear weather, other than Archgriffin and Clear Skies, is to just pass. I mean, you go into a new round, there's no more weather anymore. It doesn't stick throughout the round. So it's a very viable solution to weather in general.
Yeah, and it gives Game King an interesting dilemma as well of, like, he's got to Uridin out of Wild Hunt Hound if he doesn't draw one. And that means that, there's not necessarily the best targets around. I mean, he can get one rider out with a Slizzard, right? That's pretty good. But it's going to be a slightly awkward position for Game King from here on out. Double Archgriffin, very good draw for JJ. He doesn't want that Frost, though. He's going to drop that. And we see Iris coming out, which is a huge draw for JJ right now.
Exactly. Trading Frost for Iris, I think JJ's very happy.
Not a bad trade. Not a bad trade.
Frost is not a card you want to see in hand. Obviously, you want to pull those out and tutor them out and just thin them out with the Frost Hounds, obviously. And Iris, a card that we saw before, it was a big point swing for Game King, but in the end, not enough. If you have the right synergies, like the Spy synergies, like the Frost, for example, taking it down, especially with the Riders, it can create a big point gap. And it's a silver card that's pretty much kind of like Commander's Horn, just a bit more utility because it doesn't you don't have to stack a row and it has maybe a little bit less counters.
Yeah, absolutely. If you play Gwent right now, or you've been watching it a little bit, you've probably seen Iris in action a few times. Even today, it's proving a very popular card just because of its explosive power. Even used mid-round, it can just swing the entire tempo of a round. But right now we see Game King having to guess the row that JJ will play units on. But what he's actually going to do is he's just going to drown the units in wherever he plays them.
Exactly. I mean, and we see Game King playing into this round, not dry passing, which is interesting because if JJ is able to stay in this round and not allow Game King to really get ahead of him, like we see here, JJ finishes a point up, and he obviously if Game King passes now, he's going to be a card down. You can't play that Frightener and expect JJ not to have one, which might be his line of thought. But in general, we normally see a lot of dry passes round 2.
Game King getting a little bit of a taste of his own medicine there. JJ returning the favor and arch-griffining his Wild Hunt Rider into the other graveyard. So JJ getting his revenge in almost exactly the same spot in the game in which it cost him the last game. So basically, Game King can't Slizzard that out now, right? That takes away a lot of value from that Slizzard. If you play a Hound from it, it's only 7. If you play a Rider, it's a 12-point play, which is really nice. Wild Hunt Rider has really become an absolute staple of Uridin recently. Nice high base strength on it at 9, and just in a long round, this card does work.
And it has great synergy with Iris as well, which is one of the main things, I think. Pretty much no one runs Riders without Iris. It's those two cards that go very well together, and I mean that's really, I think, Game King's plan here. He wants to really have that Iris go off with a Rider. That's his main thought. And we see Caretaker as well, which is an interesting card because in a mirror matchup, you're pretty much just rezzing from your own graveyard, basically.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe because Iris is disloyal, it's marked as an enemy. So if Game King plays his Iris, JJ could actually muzzle it onto Game King's side of the board and then kill it.
It's an interesting topic you bring up. I mean, we're gonna see it unfold, but muzzle definitely brings in a lot of different plays that you don't really expect to happen, and we'll see that unfold now. We'll see if both players are aware of the situation and how each card works, because these cards have a very high skill ceiling. I think it's hard to really see. You have to get creative basically with some of these cards. There's the very standard way of playing them, which people obviously expect, but then there's the very creative way of playing them that people might not expect as much.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting, and like you say, having the Rider available for JJ does make his Iris way, way easier to hit. I do like JJ's hand right now, like he's up a card. Game King doesn't look to have any really obvious means of building a big enough gap to get ahead a card himself, so we could just see, maybe Frightener or something come down for the delay just to equal it out, which is what we're going to see here. And JJ's in a pretty nice spot. He's got a great hand.
Yeah, he's going to be up a lot of points. If Game King is able to bleed out here and create a big point gap he's going to have to play Weather really to try and claw back in if he wants to go for a long round. If not, GJ I think is going to be fine waiting out this round. He has great cards in hand like Rider. He has Frost as well, and you can use cards like Monstrous Nest or Muzzle to create big point swing as well. So I think in general, because of this spy, he's going to be able to stay in this round. He's really just looking to preserve his finishers for round 3.
Yeah, there's a strong call for his Gels right now as well. He's ahead, and it would just allow him to set up his draw for next round if he doesn't believe that Game King is going to play into it. I mean, he's got his Muzzle in hand, he's got his Carrion and his Iris in hand, so he's got a large part of his sort of core victory in his hand right now, which is nice.
Yeah, and Muzzle a card in this matchup that might just find standard value, not much more than that. Like we saw in the last match, stealing that Impera Brigade, it adds not only the 16 points of value, which is the maximum, but it also adds some extra utility. In this case, maybe not so much. Most of these cards don't have so much utility unless you get maybe a weakened Rider, for example, would be really devastating, I think. But those plays are kind of hard to pull off because they require multiple combinations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, JJ also has cards like Monsters Nest and whatnot, really, really great for getting, just great tempo onto the board. Neither Uridin coming out yet. What are you expecting to see the Uridins used for here?
I mean, you have a lot of options. It's a leader that's really very versatile. You don't have to do a single thing like maybe Dagon. It used to always draw Fog because of the Foglet synergy, but Uridin is pretty much, you look at the situation where you want to play more Weather, you play the Frost Hound, you need another Rider for the Iris synergy, you play a Rider. It really depends on what you need. I think Uridin is very viable because of that, because it's very versatile, and you can use it in multiple situations.
Yeah, definitely. We see Game King going for the pass, though. He's going to take it on equal cards into round 3. JJ has to play first, so Game King does have the last card advantage. But JJ, I've got to give the slight edge to him just in terms of hand size, but this could really still go either way. There's so many variables at play here.
Yeah, we'll have to see the mulligans, but I mean, in general, we see Muzzle, we see Gills, we see Iris, we see a lot of great cards here, I think, and maybe he doesn't want a mulligan, he gets another Rider here, which might be good if he can play multiple Frosts.
I mean, he's got Caranthir in hand. Actually, does he have a way of playing another? I mean, he could Hound out from Uridin, right? I believe he's only played 2 from his deck. So with double Rider, there's a potential that he does that.
Yeah, and we don't see any kind of really a lock or anything, but we do see Toad Prince in Game King's hand with that Mana Core, which creates a very big Toad Prince, and also maybe add some extra synergies with cards like Monster Nest, for example. We saw Freddy use in his match against Adzakov.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the important things to point out is that Game King has managed to hold on to that Clear Skies until round 3, so he can let the Frost come out of JJ, and he can just immediately clear it and know that he's basically not going to have to deal with Weather again in this round, right?
And he'll make these Riders, be worth a lot less because they won't get that Frost damage every single turn.
Yeah, I think the Clear Skies could really come as a surprise to JJ here. I can't imagine him expecting it in this matchup. It really is sort of like a nice little tournament tech coming from Game King, which is great to see. But it'll be interesting to see after how many Frosts does Game King commit it.
I think JJ is smart. He's really just not going to commit both Frosts immediately, thinking that there might be a Clear Skies or some kind of full clear like a Baya, for example. In general, I mean, in round 3, you really want to maximize the amount of points you have, because passing, obviously, and card advantage isn't that big of a thing. It's really just maximizing points from the cards you have in hand. So we're going to look for, really when Game King wants to play that Clear Skies, and it might be really a game decider.
Yeah, so Caretaker's coming out here to steal from JJ's graveyard. He's taking an Archgriffin and clearing the weather, so he will remain with that Clear Skies in hand and actually uses an alternative means of dropping that Frost off the board. So Caretaker, really just a fantastic monsters card, absolute utility powerhouse. You can do anything from stealing high-strength Skulliger units to stealing Archgriffins to clear Frost off a row. It's really a wonderful monsters card.
Yeah, like we said in the mirror matchup, it really is just like a glorified Sigdrifa, because it can really just pull from your own graveyard. And I mean, because you're pretty much your opponent is going to have the same graveyard as you. You're going to have the same cards. You have the Frost Hounds, you're going to have the Archgriffins. So in the end, I think Game King didn't have too much problem with the weather, and he still has that Clear Sky, like we said earlier. So he really has, I think, no problem at all with weather in this matchup.
Yeah, and this is where we're going to see maybe that Clear Skies come out and JJ's plan unravel a little bit, right? Because those Riders, the saving grace is that the Riders have a decent sized body. Playing them even not into a Frost effect won't lower your average points per turn by too much. They're still 9 strengths. It's not like playing a dead Wild Hunt Hound, but them losing that Frost effect is really, really painful.
We're going to have to see what kind of Iris synergy he has without those Riders taking it down immediately, because obviously if the Frost is cleared, there's not going to be any guaranteed way to kill Iris unless he has, the ways to kill it with Gills or with, Monster's Nest. But in general, I think it puts a big dent in JJ's plan.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be rough for him. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if the weather isn't cleared this round, he has to immediately play it on the melee row. But the weather is getting cleared. He can't even get 1 turn of damage on it. He can't even... Oh, he wouldn't have even got a turn anyway. Caretaker would have tanked it. So JJ in real trouble when it comes to killing this Iris.
I think we can see it in his face. He's quite worried now. Having to playing 2 Frosts and having both of them get cleared, it puts a big dent in your game plan in general for round 3, and I think he's, a bit worried about that. We can see in his expression. I think that's not the way he planned this to go, and we still see some big swings from Game King from that, Toad Prince Manticore combo, for example, and his own Iris with double Drowner.
Yeah, I mean, JJ does have a few tricks up his sleeve. He does have, I believe, a Caretaker in his deck still. So that Gels can play a Caretaker guaranteed, because we've seen his other gold cards. Which means that, is there any way that he could kill the Iris from that? He could spawn a Drowner with Monster's Nest, and then Caretaker another Drowner and kill it?
Yeah, I think that's the only real combo we're going to see. I mean, it's hard to kill the Iris without the expected ways to do it. And you have a deck that has so many Frosts that you always expect there to be a way to kill that Iris with the Frost and the Rider synergy. When it doesn't happen, you always have to look and get a bit more creative to try and kill it, because if you don't kill the Iris, it's almost impossible to really get a lot of value from it.
Yeah, Iris really a feature card this tournament, I would describe it. A lot of the game right now revolving around her, but honestly, JJ is looking a little bit in trouble. Even with Caretaker targets, it's going to be fairly low value. I mean, he's got a Manticore there that he could just take for a bunch of points, I guess, but it's rough. It really is rough. JJ has to really show some of his genius here to pull off the win in this game, I think. Game King just has a bunch of high value cards, right? He's got White Frost, which is really nice right now. That White Frost could be damaging, man.
And we said earlier, when would Clear Skies be better than Archgriffin? Well, in this situation, because Archgriffin can only clear 1 row, and obviously you can't clear both in one go, although it does have the 8 strength body, which isn't too shabby. But in general, I think Game King in quite a good position, I think. Just the fact that he has that synergy with the White Frost, the Drowners, and the Iris is going to make it so that if you can get the Iris off, without a problem, I think he's going to really maximize his value and get a ton of points.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, those Drowners represent a lot of points. That Frost represents a lot of points. It can also represent a pretty quick death to that Iris when combined with Drowners. But we see JJ's Iris coming out immediately, so it'll be very interesting to see his game plan around this.
I mean, I think he has to kill it, otherwise you wouldn't play it, at all, because you're just giving 3 points to your opponent. So I think he knows he can kill it, but it's not going to be, the most common way he normally does it. So he has to change his game plan quite a bit. And, this is the situations where these really good players have to get a bit creative and try and play, outside the box to try and get these wins.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of those situations, absolutely. JJ is pondering every move. You can see him really taking his time with this one, because both players are, of course, playing for a spot in tomorrow's semi-finals, so this is a pretty key match. So this is to take the lead in the series, and once you go to 2 wins, you've only got to win 1 more, and then you really do take your place tomorrow, which is a big prize indeed. So JJ has got to consider his next move very, very closely, because he knows that he is probably on paper in a worse position than Game King.
I think that Monster's Nest, I think Game King would have loved to see it in his hand with that Manticore synergy and that 20-point goal that could come out of it. But it is in JJ's hand, and I think it's still going to be a really good card. It's going to get a lot of value regardless of that Manticore synergy. So I think he's not, I think he's okay with having that in hand. It's fairly decent finisher in round 3, obviously in the longer round, maybe not as good.
So we see a Slizzard coming out here. JJ's pondering his options with this Slizzard. He's going to go for the Drowner, which allows him to play a Drowner from his own deck, and then he will, I imagine, spawn one with Monster's Nest to kill that Iris and finish it off. But we do see there's Frost on the board and there's Drowners in Game King's hands, meaning that they represent a lot of value.
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, that's the only way to kill Iris. You have to use 2 Drowners, which isn't the most efficient thing to do. If you had Frost, it would be, obviously much better. And I think that's going to be the big difference in JJ winning this or not. I think the fact that he has to, go so out of his way to kill that Iris and to get that proc off is going to make, a lot of trouble for his game plan. I think that might just lose him the game. I mean, we're going to see both players with Iris, so it's going to be tough to call. Obviously, Iris creating a lot of points in a very, bursty fashion. That's not something you can really call just right off the bat.
Yeah, one of the caster's nightmare cards. Not quite as bad as Harold Houndsnout, but it's up there for sure. However, it does have the advantage of, Game King's Iris won't immediately die. There's no Riders on the board, there's no Frost, so he can't, there's no Riders and Frost, so he can't immediately kill it. So JJ has a little bit of time to attempt counterplay on it, but for now, he's got to kill that Drowner.
Yeah, and seeing just 2 Frost sticking every single turn is going to be devastating. We do see JJ with big swingy cards like the Muzzle, like the Monster's Nest, that can pull a Necrophage or an Insectoid unit from your deck, pretty much from any one of those units. Cards like Ghoul, for example, with a Manticore combo, and cards like Drowner, for example, that can really hurt that Iris there and, get that proc off and get the 25 points on your own board. But in general, I mean, you want Monster's Nest as a finisher, and you want it in synergy with cards like Manticore in your graveyard, for example. In this situation, it's a decent amount of points for a silver card, but it's not game deciding.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see Monster's Nest outside of its traditional usage with the Prince and whatnot. So, yeah, we're going to see some flexible usage of Monster's Nest for that Drowner to kill Iris, and that Muzzle is still sitting in JJ's hand. So there is still big point value for JJ in this game, but it is running out pretty quickly.
Yeah, we're going to see probably a Rider here just to make sure he can get that Iris off immediately, or he might just take a bit of a riskier position. But yeah, he's definitely going to go for that Rider in probably the range row or maybe just the front row. I mean, we have 2 units at 3 strength, so it's going to cause for an awkward situation where you can't kill the Iris off immediately.
There we go. So it does go in the range row. You're 100% correct. He wants to guarantee that the Iris will take that Frost damage, and that also does mean that Iris is on instant kill as soon as it's played. So JJ now faces an interesting dilemma where he may have to block that Frost.
And I think, yeah, he's definitely going to go for, he can't really block it in the range row with the Iris because it's a much higher strength unit, the Drowner, but he does get that Iris off and he gets the points on his board, but I think in the end it's just too many points with Game King's Iris as well, and the Frost taking every single turn too.
Yeah, I mean, he does have a 16-point muzzle here onto that Archgriffin, but it is really...
If the Iris hits the Archgriffin or hits one of the bronze units that are, and that makes it so the muzzle is dead, and JJ is completely out of this game, and there's no chance there.
That's absolutely savage. Iris hitting everything it needed to deny that muzzle completely, which is extremely rough. We see head in hands, JJ really feeling the pressure of this one. He's kicking himself over that game. He's got to, summon up his courage, muster his mental fortitude, and just approach the new games with a clean slate, because you can't let your sort of mental state slip like that.
Yeah, we see a real life facepalm there from JJ. I mean,
not like this.
It's definitely tough, after that, and especially having 2 games where you lose in such a weird way. I think an unexpected way. Having a dead Muzzle, for example, it really makes you think if you did anything wrong, if you could have played it, a bit better. And it's one of those cards, Muzzle, that we said earlier. It can be really good, better than the standard neutral goals like Eskel, for example, but it can also be really bad, like we saw there at the end. Game King maybe didn't expect to play around the Muzzle, maybe didn't do it on purpose, but I think it was a great play regardless. We're going to go right into game 3 here and see what happens, or game 4, sorry,
yeah.
and see what happens here if Game King can really take this win and go straight to the semifinals.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see Bruva Hoog, Game King's last remaining deck. He needs to win with this to qualify for tomorrow's semi-finals, and if he wins this game, he will do so. However, JJ does still have the choice between his Henselt and his Eridan, so this game is going to be Bruva versus Eridan.
And we do so, like we said before, we have the Archgriffins for JJ, which will, I think, play around quite well around that golden weather. And that's going to make it so that I think it's a favorable matchup for JJ in general. But like we said before, I think in Gwent, matchups aren't really decided just by the decks you have to really play them well as well. So I think maybe JJ doesn't have the guaranteed win, but he's definitely, I think, favored in this matchup.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, we see Game King not even having Gold Weather in his hand. I mean, it may even be a conscious choice to not pursue that Gold Weather because he's seen this Eridan deck. So JJ's keeping his last deck to try and be a surprise. And that does have it's double-edged, right? Because Game King now knows this Uridan deck and he knows what it contains, whereas JJ doesn't know the list of this Broover. So actually, Game King has the slight knowledge advantage here.
And yeah, we don't see Golden Weather in Game King's hand, but he does have Yavin that can pull a spell, and that spell will be a guaranteed Golden Weather because we do see Scorch and Muzzle already in his hand, which are his other two spells. But I think in general, Game King does have access to that weather, but like we said before, maybe it's not going to be as useful as he thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of points to be had, right, with those, he's even got the Vryheads to clear his own weather, so he can clear away the frost that Uridan plays, and then he's got Marksman to work nicely with those Dwarven Agitators and Dwarven Mercenaries, so he's got a pretty nice, points per card. If we're talking about a points per card basis, Scoia'tael actually does really well right now. Broover's great for that.
He also has Operator in his deck, which synergizes really well with the Agitators as well, if he's able to draw into that Operator and get, a really nice synergy there with the Agitators. In general, Game King does go first, so maybe not the happiest, position for him to, maybe play Yavin and get Golden Weather. If he would have played second, it would have opened up that window. In this case, not as not great to play a spy into your opponent if you do go first as well.
Yeah, so JJ, like we see with Game King in the previous game, going second, chooses to just establish his Frost on the board. But Game King, of course, does have natural answers to this in his hand, which is nice. We're actually going to see the Yavin come down. Very interesting play from Game King here. Maybe he just wants to immediately get that Gold Weather out. Oh, yeah. It's Roach or Golden Weather. Not much of a choice here. So Ragnarok is going to be added into the hand of Game King. Because Roach, famously not a card that you particularly want to draw.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think Ragnarok is a card that, if unanswered, creates a lot of value, especially over a long round, like a round one, for example. But we do see JJ has two Archgriffins in hand. He really prepared for this Golden Weather. We saw him in Trenos doing a lot of damage in Gwen's number 2 because there weren't really much answers for it. But I think JJ learned his lesson and spoke to his teammate maybe or his friend in Trenos and used to bring some Archgriffins to this tournament.
Yeah, Metrogold's Golden Weather was pretty sinister in Gwen Slam. But one of the advantages of Golden Weather here actually is JJ is running singular Weather row clears, right? These Archgriffins only clear one row at a time, so there will be a little bit of value from the Gold Weather, which is nice. But we actually just see him choosing to ramp up his own and really, get that Frost ticking.
Yeah, and because obviously the opening play with the Frost Hound and the Frost isn't so high tempo, it opened up a window for Game King to play that Yavin without being punished. Because if obviously your opponent opens up with, for example, Crones, then you can't really play Yavin instantly because you have a 32-point gap that you just created in 2 turns, and that's very hard to come back from. But in the end, I think Game King's not too worried, especially if he would have passed JJ. It would give Game King a very long round 3, which is great for Golden Weather.
Yeah, it really is. But we see the Golden Weather coming down now. This is not going to surprise JJ whatsoever. This is what he prepared for, but it is still damaging, right? And actually, Super JJ still has a pretty reasonable points gap.
Yeah, and we see Roach coming out, helping out with that very low tempo opening play with the Ragnarok. Obviously, Ragnarok gets value over a long turn. As a burst play, it gets very little value because it really just hammers down every single round. In one round, it only does 4 points of damage. In this situation, not so great. Roach helps out with that. He adds 4 more points and makes it so the tempo swing isn't so low, and you can stay in round 1 like this one.
Yeah, Roach is a really fantastic card. Just adding value to the first gold card you play is never a bad thing. Big fan of that card. But we see Game King going for the pretty great pass. Sorry, not Game King. Super JJ going for the pretty great pass, giving him a 13-point gap. That's pretty significant, especially as that Frost is dealing 3 damage a turn. So actually, Game King needs to play 16 points to even draw.
Exactly. He might just go 2 cards down here, but in the end, I mean, it makes it so that he gets the say over the length of round 3. And normally, if you have a very long round 3 with Golden Weather, you create, a lot of value for that drought, for example, and that normally wins you the game. So I think he's not super worried. It's a risky pass. I mean, you also clear the weather for JJ. He knows that he doesn't have a full board clear with his Archgriffins, and he can pass and use that as a way to clear this Golden Weather and just counter it completely.
Yeah, my apologies, by the way. He needs to play 12 points, of course, because Gold Weather is ticking. But that's still fairly significant. We're going to see the Agitator come down for the Mercenary, move that card out of the Frost, which will be enough to give him it when the weather ticks. So there we go. So Game King goes to -1 and takes the first round.
And this allows for a dry pass in round 2 because there is no carryover for JJ, like we saw before with, for example, the Curse deck. Not the case with Uridan, and that makes it so the dry pass is possible when we go into a very, very large, very long round 3, where Game King can really, play that drought if he finds it and get a ton of points from it.
Yeah, that drought will be very, very damaging, especially, if played once. JJ can't dodge it. If there's units spread across rows and that drought comes out, it'll be really great. However, we do see triple Archgriffin in JJ's hand. He is prepared to see more Gold Weather. But right now, it's looking like, honestly, row stacking could be punished by that Dol Blathanna Trapper, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, trappers, obviously, over a long run, they also generate more points because there's more units on your opponent's board, so you get more value from that as well. I think Golden Weather Scoia'tael is a deck that has, two ways to win, both with movement and with Golden Weather. So even if JJ is able to counter that drought, if Game King does draw it, with those Archgriffins, he still has the double marksman, the triple marksman with cards like Zoltan, for example, to create huge tempo swings over a long round as well. And we see Blue Mountain Commando come out as well, which thins the deck for Game King and makes it easier for him to find this drought in round 3. So it has that added purpose, and it's maybe the big reason why he didn't want to dry pass immediately.
Yeah, Blue Mountain Commando, really great card in terms of, like, it's a nice little tempo boost. Of course, you can typically use them with cards such as Dwarven Mercenaries to get a nice little bit of points on the board. But also, yeah, the thinning is fantastic. This is almost like reminiscent of Northern Realm style play, where they can thin their deck down to an extremely high rate by playing these muster units. So Blue Mountain Commando, really great in this deck. We don't see, like, there's no Zoltan, which is a little bit worrying because Zoltan, there are certain gold cards and certain archetypes that are simply so powerful they're just core to a one game, right? So seeing Zoltan Chauvet not be in the hand of Game King will be a little bit frustrating for him at this point.
Yeah, like we said before, Zoltan, great with marksman, great synergy, and it creates, it's a very, very high value gold for round 3, and really as any finisher, to be honest, even in this short round. So really the two viable goals that you need for round 3 are Drought and Zoltan, and Game King has none of these, so he's a bit worried, I think, in this situation.
Yeah, I think that this is actually not looking to be an excellent draw for Game King right now, which is frustrating for him because he actually has very high value cards in his hand, but what JJ is doing is essentially almost dodging playing his weather, right? Like he's going, okay, well, you may have ways of dealing with this. I'm just going to tempo in other ways and get your actual high value cards. Like having to spend a Double Thunder Marksman just to bleed in round 2, it's kind of painful because typically if you had Zoltan in your hand, you'd want to be using that as part of your finisher, but Game King just kind of has unreliable draws right now. There's 2 gold cards that he needs, and he can only draw 1.
Exactly, and we see Muzzle here with Gills. Like I said before, a bit of RNG with Gills. You don't have the guaranteed draws every time, but stealing that marksman, like we said before, it adds so much more value than just that swing, the 14-point swing, by stealing it. But then we see Game King, of course, the mirror Muzzle again. We saw it before, we see it again. I think we can definitely declare that Muzzle is a great card in the current meta, and it really works out well.
Yeah, Muzzle is absolutely a fantastic card in the current meta. And once again, we see the double Muzzle, it's sort of like, gimme, nope, gimme, mine now, but it's ridiculous, right? Like this card is such a high impact card that it's actually being run to counter itself. It's crazy. The best answer to Muzzle is just immediately muzzling the card back.
Exactly, and we see Archgriffins. I mean, it's interesting because these cards are great value if you're clearing weather, but if you aren't, they are just 8 strength bodies. And because Game King doesn't really have drought at all and doesn't have a way to summon weather right now, if he's bleeding and Super JJ finds himself, like in one of the previous games, getting bled out where he doesn't really have those high tempo plays to maintain his tempo in this round, he might end up in trouble again.
Yeah, one of the things that Game King is really going to struggle with this round is just not having any ways of moving those Blue Mountain Commandos. Not only are they sitting in weather, well, they're not anymore, but those cards get value when you move them. When you move the Dwarven Mercenary, they add the strength gained by moving to 5, right? It's a great card. But with no movement in your hand, it's very frustrating. We do have like Bruvahoog sitting around, which can be played on a few things. Probably Barclay Els is what I'd expect because he has the Hattori in hand to resurrect it. So that's a nice little bit of tempo, but realistically, Game King's hand is... He's got a nice few cards. He's got a few nice cards, but none of them are, to me, adding up to a win condition.
Yeah, exactly, and you're missing the key moving targets, like you said, like Zoltan, like the Agitators, like the Operator, for example, on the Agitators, which make it so you have a lot of movement tools and can really synergize well with these Blue Mountain Commanders and with these Marksmen as well. And he's missing pretty much all of those. He does have the Weather Clears that do also move, but it's hard to get, obviously if you want to clear the road where your units are on, you can't move them as well, so it makes it a bit odd.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, to be honest, he's barely taking the points lead each time he plays a card, which when you're, when you're playing to take the lead, you go 2 cards down. That's really dangerous territory. Although Super JJ is lining up rather wonderfully for this incoming Trapper.
Yeah, Trapper, a card that lost a lot of value, I think, and it wasn't really played too much in the meta. Also because it doesn't really synergize too well with Drought, because the trap does get killed by the Drought, for example. So I think Game King knows this, and he's probably going to play it fairly soon, I think, just to make sure that if he draws Drought next turn, he doesn't have a dead 6-point card in his hand.
Yeah, one of the problems that Game King's going to have is that Scorch is going to be extremely hard to find value from, almost reminiscent of the previous Gwent Slam, where we saw Scorch really being a problematic card for some players. But yeah, we actually see the second Marksman committed. I'm kind of surprised at that over the Trapper.
Yeah, I think Game King is just trying to find a way to get back card advantage. I think JJ knows that Game King does not have Yavin. He used it round 1, and he pretty much, as long as he can stay ahead in points, he's going to be a card up for round 3, which, like we said before, is absolutely devastating, especially if there's very few cards being played, because the average points is going to make one card matter so much more.
There we go. We see Iris once again being this explosive burst of power, setting the points gap to 25, and that means that Game King is just going to really find it hard to continue the bleed from here on out.
It does also open up a very good possibility for that Scorch, which was previously bricked, couldn't really find a good target, and now it's finding that 13-point Karen through, which is decent and enough to really just try and bleed out a few more of JJ's cards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent little Scorch target. In this matchup, though, you have to be realistic and, you know, acknowledge the fact that when it targets the highest unit on the board, when your opponent's playing a lot of like mid-range strength creatures, it's unlikely that they're going to line up above your own creatures. So smarter Game King to just take the opportunity to get a decent Scorch while he has it.
It does open up the possibility for JJ to play that Frightener and get that, you know, because of that frost damage, he will stay ahead, and that's, you know, pretty massive, I think, for trying to win this round, because he will be going 2 cards up if he can't, you know, if Game King can't claw back in and play a very high tempo unit.
There you go. Look at the eyebrows from Game King, raising his eyebrows. He knows that that Frightener was expertly placed. Excellent Frightener timing, but this Trapper is pretty legit. Going to be doing 12 points of damage and removing the trap itself, so JJ will actually go down to 30 points when that trap goes off.
Yeah, I mean, like we said before, being 1 card down in round 3 is devastating. Being 2 cards down is absolutely game losing. I think it's game deciding if Game King can't find a way to get back some card advantage. Going into round 3, 2 cards down, I think he just automatically loses the game. We might just see an early forfeit, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that that would be a very, very rough position to be in for sure. Bearing in mind that actually he's got to play Barclay Elves from that Brewer to be able to Hattori it, so he can't do all of that in 1 round. So even some of his potential power in his hand has to be played this round in order to come out next. So Game King is in a very rough position. That Frightener was just absolutely incredible in terms of essentially, you know, really giving JJ the edge in this game.
Yeah, some players might think that the Iris was a bit too much in a round where you're getting bled, but it opens up the Frightener play, and here we see a Drowner coming out and saving really that Trapper from doing too much damage in the end. We see Drowner, you know, being used in a creative way, not, you know, to throw a unit in weather, for example, and create, you know, points that way, but saving his back row from that damage from that trap. I think it's a really good way to use it as well.
Yeah, Game King looking extremely frustrated with the situation he finds himself in, but I know Game King and he's one of the most positive players I know, so I do trust him to not go on tilt and think of a solution to the situation he's in. However, it is an incredibly tough one, right? He's got a Hattori that won't necessarily find the value he wants it to. He's got his leader, which is a great leader card, very flexible, but this is he goes to the pass, -2 into round 3. Give me a percentage Game King's chance of winning this game.
I can't give you an exact percentage, but it's very, very low. The only saving grace is that JJ has a lot of Archgriffins in hand, which aren't really considered, you know, the ideal finisher in these Eridan decks, I think, or really in any deck. An 8-point bronze that really doesn't do too much in terms of points isn't fantastic, especially if they're not clearing any weather. So I think that's the only saving grace, but if JJ's 2 cards up, I think he's not, you know, too worried either.
Yeah, we do see a Slizzard come out there, which allows JJ a little bit of utility, right? He's got a... He doesn't have any Frost remaining in his deck, I don't believe, but he will have some pretty high points from that Slizzard coming out nonetheless. So this is a rough position. When we see Game King's hand, we'll get a little bit of a better indication of what chance he stands. He looks like he drew a Dwarven Agitator, which is, you know, it's a good card, but it's not necessarily what he wants in this scenario, although he can Barclay the Operator on it.
Yeah, that's the only thing.
My apologies, Brewer
use the Brewer, but I mean, like we said before, I think even just being 2 cards up is too much. I mean, even if you have these 8-point Archgriffins, which aren't too fantastic, it can't really manipulate the graveyards and really help with maybe Hattori not finding a target, or maybe even Caretaker getting a better target if you can steal, you know, the exact unit you want. So there's a bit of a synergy there as well with Archgriffins and Caretaker, but in general, I think 3 Archgriffins for round 3 when you're not clearing weather is not what JJ wants to see. I think it's not ideal, but being 2 cards up is definitely ideal. So I think that, you know, kind of helps him a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, even if they're not clutch plays, simply the points on the card that your opponent does not have is monumental. That's 16 points that JJ essentially just gets as a bonus this round, right? So we see Hattori coming down, rezzing out an Agitator. It looks like he's just going to be on the Mercenary spam for points. Yeah,
that's pretty much it. I mean, and in the end, I think it won't be enough. It also not only adds the fact that obviously the 8-point bodies aren't fantastic, but it also gives much more reactiveness to JJ, where he can play, you know, after Game King's pass and really manipulate the board state quite a bit, and that will also help him a lot. For example, in rezzing maybe an Iris, for example, from Game King's graveyard as well.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say Game King has found himself a little bit unfortunate with draws this game. Not getting out that Zoltan, not naturally getting out that Operator. It has been a rough game for Game King.
Yeah, but 8-point Arch Griffins are just so low compared to the normal bronze average. So, I mean, I don't think it will be enough, but it'll be closer than it should be, considering if you're 2 cards up,
Yeah.
you normally win by 30 to 40 points.
This is absolutely crazy. They're like sort of gold weather being fairly negligible in this matchup, and this is a Proof of Hoog running double gold weather against triple Arch Griffin, and weather hasn't really featured. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw the deck list, we knew that, Arch Griffins, they're going to clear a lot of weather. Golden Weather is going to be a big threat, but in the end, because of draws and because of the way the rounds played out, we really didn't see any of that, which is quite odd considering this matchup with Aridin and also with Golden Weather.
What a fantastic caretaker target there, because he knows that Game King is going to be spamming out mercenaries and moving cards, and that marksman is just going to shoot them.
Exactly.
It's brilliant.
You see a 9-point, swing there, but it's going to be much more than that once we see the movement coming in from these agitators. So a very smart play, very heads-up play by JJ, I think. Also, we see a display of a lot of creativity in these plays. These very high-skilled players, they can do a lot of things that maybe other players wouldn't even think about. And I think we see Game King here with the agitator as well, which is a great, I think, maybe the best target in the game, really.
Yeah, I think that is the best operator target in the game. I really love Game King's build here. Like, the operator for agitator is something that I love playing. It's really great. It does just give your opponent a dead 2-strength card, which, considering what it gives you, is fantastic. Agitator, of course, not tutoring, not playing from the deck. Agitator actually copying a dwarf in your deck and playing it, so you'll almost always have a target for it. So, yeah, like you said, best operator target in the game, in my opinion.
And here, I mean, we see a 9-point gap and JJ still being a card up. I think it'll be enough to tie the series here 2-2. And we'll be going into a game 5. It's going to be really, really interesting.
This is crazy. We're going to be having 2 5-game series in a row. This is absolutely phenomenal play shown by both players. We've had some pretty crazy games so far. We've had clutch Arch Griffins, not so clutch Arch Griffins, but when they're card advantage, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. We're going to see how close the skill really is between all these players. We see a dead agitator, though. It's going to be closer than we thought, considering that JJ was 2 cards up. I mean, it's really, you expect him to really blow out Game King's play here and win by, quite a bit. But in the end, he doesn't win by all that much, only 7 points. Maybe a lot less than he expected, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, normally when you go in 2 cards up, you're expecting the, 20, 30-point lead. But actually, we see JJ taking the victory by 7 points, which means that this match will continue into a match 5. It is sudden death for who gets the spot in the semi-final tomorrow.
And not only is the game more exciting because it is a 2-2 series and we're going to a last game, but it also makes it so that the prize money is split almost evenly between both players. Whoever wins this will take home, the $600 that were in stake, and the other player will take $400. So even if you lose, you're still taking quite a bit of money plus the money for showing up. So I think both players are at least have that to lean back on.
Absolutely. We have Berger and Dandelion doing a little bit of clothes swapping right now, which is great, but we are ready to head in to Game 5. It is going to be Henselt, played by Super JJ, versus Proof of Hoog, played by Game King himself. So this is going to be a fantastic match, and I'm very excited to see who gets the spot in tomorrow's semi-final.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to talk about here, once again, is the weather. Because we see triple Kairani Sergeant from JJ. He's really prepared for this weather. He expected a lot of these matchups after Matranos did so well with it in Gwen Slam number 2. And of course, Game King, the same deck he just played, so it's nothing new here. We're going to see Drought, we're going to see Ragnarok, and we're going to see a lot of movement.
Yeah, I really love some of the inclusions of JJ in this Henselt list, like Villain Trettenmirth coming back. Villain Trettenmirth, if you don't know, is a card that when that timer goes off, it will Scorch. It essentially plays a Scorch, right? It scorches the highest units on the board. So it is a card from, again, kind of from a previous era of Gwent, back when golds were immune, but it's getting a little bit of popularity these days, and I'm really interested to see if it ends up being a core card in this matchup.
A card that has kind of resurrected in this meta is also Siege Towers, a card that I personally haven't seen in quite a few patches. It really got a bit abandoned just compared to other bronzes that you had, the option to choose for your decks in Northern Realms, but we do find it's a pretty good Henselt target after its recent change. I think it found a bit of a space there to really edge into these decks, and I think JJ, he likes the card and he decided to play it in his deck.
Yeah, there's some really scary tempo that you can do with Reinforced Siege Towers, actually. If you get that Siege Master down, it'll boost itself again, and then you can Henselt them into double crewman pockets, and those cards are just easy tempo, right? It's absolutely fantastic. It's near unconditional tempo, you just need the crewman there, so really, really powerful card. But yeah, it's actually seeing low-key a pretty strong showing. So we see the Ragnarok roll out immediately. What do you do with your JJ? Do you row stack, or do you just clear this?
I think you would just clear this and see how the game plans out. He might also maybe want to pass, but like we said before, passing against a deck that runs Golden Weather is really dangerous, because if you don't have the great clears for round 3, especially like a 13-card round 3, it gets very risky to play into such a long round 3. So in general, I think JJ wants to stay in this round and see how it pans out.
So I want to ask you about some of the inclusions in this Henselt list, because some of them to me are really interesting. What do you make of the White Frost sitting in JJ's hand right now?
I mean, it has synergy with the K-Remets. It makes it so that those cards synergize. You can tutor it out, and it creates a pretty good. It's kind of like Burn the Brand.
Yeah, it's almost like a Northern Realms Burn the Brand, right?
It's similar where you play a Silver Weather card, you tutor it out, you play a gold body. It has very similar. I think JJ, finds a lot of value in that because he also ran Burn the Brand in Curse, for example. So. But he goes for the pass here. That's very surprising.
Well, I actually think that this is an interesting move because, last game, Game King essentially suffered, right? Because he didn't draw his drought. He didn't have a second Gold Weather. So if you just do that again and you eliminate Gold Weather from the game and make Game King rely on drawing his second Gold Weather, it can put him into some problematic circumstance like we saw last game.
Yeah, this is one of the best ways to counter Gold Weather, by passing. I mean, it's really, really powerful. People maybe don't see it as a great counter to a Golden Weather or don't think about it too much because it's not, the most obvious way to do it. But if you don't have Weather Clear, the easiest way to do it if you have a favorable pass is just to pass. It puts you in a pocket where maybe you're in trouble round 3 over a long round with cards like Marksman, Zoltan, and maybe, the second Golden Weather like Drought. But I think JJ is not too worried because he does have the clears and he also has the White Frost himself.
What do you think of this card that we just saw JJ draw out? My favorite card from the new set, fighting for Maid Bilberry's honor. It is Ronvid of the Small Marsh. Now, this card is, I believe, one of the first natural sources of Northern Realms carryover. It sort of gives you a permanent crewman on the board. It makes those siege towers really great.
Exactly, it's great for the carryover because even just 1 point of strength, blocks those dry passes, but it's also fantastic where you can really use that crewman tag as well to get a lot of synergy. We see a very interesting summoning circle there, getting a Yavin himself, and he also has Thaler in hand, which is going to put Game King in a position where he has to go into a long round 3 possibly, because there will be a threat of, JJ going a card up.
But with that Drought in hand, a long round 3 could be exactly what Game King wants. He's got the Drought, and he's got the units to throw Super JJ's units into the Drought, because he'll clear a row or two, maybe probably just one row, actually, looking at his hand with Cade Venny Sergeant, and then the Mercenaries will start chucking units into the Drought left, right, and centre, and also they are excellent for disrupting that crewman, but we see it come out now.
I think Game King is paying a lot of respect to the Henselt. The fact that the Ballista combo with Henselt is absolutely devastating, maybe even more than Drought in a long round where the units can really develop on your opponent's board. So I think in general, Game King is trying to play it safe. The problem is that Thaler can make it so his plan, crumbles quite a bit because once JJ plays that Thaler, it'll make it so that any round that JJ is able to surpass Game King's score means he's going to be getting card advantage, and that's going to be really bad for round 3 for Game King.
Yeah, now this is a really interesting muzzle here onto the Cade Venny Sergeant. This does deny some resurrects of it, of course, if Shani was present. Shani is present in JJ's list as well, so actually that will deny him the resurrect. So kind of a cool muzzle, really, because it, essentially cuts in half the amount of weather clear that JJ is capable of. However, I think it's interesting that Game King is spending such cool. That's 2 golds, Bert. 2 golds to bleed 2 cards out of your opponent.
But the
what
muzzle,
do you think of that? The
muzzle is blocking the Henselt target as well on the Cade Venny Sergeant, which would clear the whole board basically. So I mean, maybe he's looking more into the future and thinking that this Drought is going to do a lot of damage over a very long round, and he's really deciding to go into this very long round where he knows that Jay does not maybe have those cards in hand, the Sergeants, and it makes it so that he can really bleed properly this time. I think it's the first time he'll be able to really bleed out JJ.
Yeah, here we see those movement units doing the work we mentioned, throwing units into the Drought. He knows that the Henselt target, you are correct, on that Cade Venny Sergeant is gone. There is no weather clear sitting in JJ's hand right now, and this Drought could potentially be very damaging, but it's replied with a weather of its own.
Yeah, and we see clears, but one clear came a bit too early. Again, you don't normally expect cards like Burn the Brand, cards like White Frost in Northern Realms, for example, or Burn the Brand and Skellige. They're kind of surprise weather tools where they're very effective because you don't expect them. We saw Van Hemer come down earlier in the series, a bit early, and now able to play around that Burn the Brand. And we see these the officers coming down a bit early as well for Game King.
Yeah, and this is a 17-point gap. Honestly, JJ starts to quite seriously need to commit points onto the board. Game King is setting up his board state excellently. He is 2 cards down, but there's a strong chance Game King can't, Super JJ can't catch up with 1 card. So Game King is already in a really nice place this round.
Exactly. When it comes down to finishers, I think Game King might be in a better position. He can really, mess up his opponent's game plan in round 3 with the Operator combo, with the Agitator, for example. And also Barclay L is going to be a lot of points if played properly. So I think Game King is pretty happy with the situation. He really wants to bleed out that Henselt maybe, or at least some of the Henselt targets.
Yeah, I do like that Ballista there, though, just reminding Game King of the explosive power of that card. Really terrifying card with Henselt decks. But honestly, the thing is, battering ram targets are denied. Until the Agitator or Barclay comes down, you're not going to get the double shot off with a battering ram. So what do? Do you just Siege Master the Ballista and keep shooting those units?
I think he might just want to get a big tempo swing where Game King might think he doesn't play Thaler, for example, and find that gap where you can play Thaler and still stay ahead and guarantee card advantage for the next round. I think that would be the best way to do it. Or just catch up in one card and do the same thing, basically.
But with 4 damage a turn tempo now ticking because of that drought, that is a 24-point gap. JJ quite significantly behind at this point.
Yeah, I think he's starting to get worried. I mean, in the situation where you're getting bled, if you start to fall so behind in tempo, it gets worrying because you're normally playing your worst cards to try and keep your finishers for round 3, but there comes a point in the round 2 where you think, oh, well, maybe I should start playing my better cards or my higher point combos, my higher point setups, because I need to stay in this round to start with.
Yeah, he does have the sort of like high damage opportunities of the battering rams now, but 24 cards is serious, right? He can't armor up against this drought. There's no units lined up for Kira. He's looking at starting to spend his core.
Yeah, I think Hensel's going to be the solution here. It's the big high tempo swing that you can get, and to just try and stay in this round. He might just have to play battering rams first and then play Hensel, and obviously he's 2 cards up still, so he can play 2 cards to equalize. Or he might just play Hensel now, or just maybe try and do it with Siege Master as well, which might be the correct solution.
Yeah, Siege Master, an awesome card, allowing a siege unit to repeat its deployability, but it is also a crewman, so in fact buffs up the deployability, sort of replacing the Ronvid that got thrown up to the siege row now. This does still leave JJ 13 points behind with 4 points of weather damage incoming, so it's 18 points required by JJ next turn if Game King were to pass right now. Do you think this is actually going to be Game King managing to take card advantage?
It's going to be tough. I mean, I think JJ still has a lot of options in hand. We see, the Kira, obviously, it's still a decent amount of gold swing. I think he can definitely do it. And we also see ADC, which might just pull another battering ram, I believe, which will be decent, or maybe even a Sergeant.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in general, I think JJ is not super worried. He might get worried if we start seeing Game King going all in, because that weather ticking over several turns is going to create a lot of points.
I think the ADC would actually be a reinforced siege tower at this point, right? Because those are 8 strength compared to the Sergeant's 7s.
That is
so
true.
I think it would be a reinforced siege tower, which is actually a pretty nice thing to pull from an ADC. That's a powerful drop on the board right there. Unusual to see Yavin actually having such a great effect in Northern Realms, but the pass does come out from Game King. Excellent pass. He has masterfully played this round. This is a great round from Game King.
Yeah, he finds card advantage and he puts JJ in a position where he really has to maybe just spend this Hensel, which is the big power play he wanted to save for round 3, I think, with the Ballistas, for example. I think Game King played it really well. Obviously he wasted cards like Muzzle and like Drought to get into this advantageous situation, but in the end, trading that for Hensel, I think is going to be proper.
Yeah, so we see JJ having to spend his Hensel right now. I believe, yeah, okay, so he plays the Siege Masters. If he played the Ballistas, he wouldn't have had double crewman, but we see the Ballistas doing their work. Sorry, that card is terrifying. We see the other Siege Master coming down. It's going to eliminate all of those, ping a couple of shots onto the Yavin for good luck as well. So JJ takes the round, and he maintains even cards, but that Hensel is gone, and that is huge. But the card I am most intrigued by, Villain Trettenberg, is still sitting there.
Not only do we see Borg, but we also see Scorch in Game King's hand, so we're going to have 2 Scorch effects, and both players really have to find a way to play around both of these. If JJ keeps this Thaler, for example, in hand, and if he knows that he can block that Scorch, for example, or use it with Borg, for example, as synergy, it can create a very awkward situation for Game King as well.
Absolutely, and that Villain Trettenberg, the big gold shiny scorchy dragon himself, is such a fantastic card, because when you have an established game plan, like Taylor coming down right now, it's a great opportunity to play it. He has to be very careful with that siege tower though, because when Game King has a Scorch in hand, even if his villain hits his own Taylor, those siege towers are then going to be opened up to Scorch.
But Game King might not know that there is a Bork, so he might just wait out that Scorch, try and find a better option to play it. And we see now Thaler blocking that Scorch, so it's going to be, maybe Game King regrets not playing that Scorch immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Muzzle coming out. Again, Roach trying to jump into JJ's hand. Of course, probably the card most famously associated with JJ. Always tries to draw itself as well. So, yeah, the Muzzle is a great card in this situation. He can again take one of those marksmen, which just, well, it halves the movement damage based on when Game King moves his units. So, Muzzle a really, really key card for stealing this marksman. I expect to see it steal it immediately.
Not only that, but it also denies the value that Game King would have had, but it also adds more value from the movements that Game King might have with mercenaries, for example. So
I love the little slap in the face that when you muzzle marksman, it shoots because you move it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's an interesting synergy. It's not maybe what most people would expect, but it's fantastic. And we see Roach coming out as well, just that extra little boost. We know JJ loves Roach. I think he's played it over pretty much every single meta. He's always been a fan of this card that comes out of your deck once you play a gold card.
Absolutely, and seeing a round 3 Roach is a pretty rare thing indeed, but JJ again, has saved his gold cards for the third round, which is a pretty interesting one. I love this double battering ram. Ronvid, such a great card, especially when those agitators come down. They're just free kills for a battering ram, keeps it going.
Yeah, we're going to find very decent value with all these bronze units, basically, because thanks to that Ronvid, that not only adds its carryover, but also has the extra crewman tag, which is great synergy with these bronze units. And we also see Keira. It's a gold card that adds, a decent amount of value, nothing game-changing, just, a little boost here and there, but not much more than that.
Yeah, the thing is that, like, this is so funny because, of course, when we and the viewers, you guys at home, can see both hands, we're just watching these Scorches, right? All eyes are on Scorch and Villain Trettenworth for who hits the high value one. I think JJ is actually arguably in the best position possible if he doesn't play it this round because of this Scorch.
Exactly, it's a card that, kind of like Igni, where you can get so much value if played correctly. You can Scorch multiple units. You can, like we saw before with Adzakov, a 34-point Scorch. I mean, that's pretty fantastic for a silver card. But it can also be a completely dead card, or even a negative point card. So it's a tricky card to use properly, and Game King might be regretting it putting in his deck right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Scorch it's so high risk but so high reward. It's a really rough inclusion for any deck, but it can pay dividends. However, we just see the battering rams starting to come down for a little bit of tempo, not killing any units quite yet. He's just playing them for 10 points apiece, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah, and we see a lot of agitators here. We see obviously a dead one for JJ. We're seeing the points right now in the cards in hand. We see both players have 5 cards and JJ's ahead, but JJ does have an agitator, which is a 2-point bronze unit. Dwarf's really not the greatest manager of machines, to be honest. So again, not going to be a great swing for JJ.
Yeah, it's a really close round. This round is incredibly tough to call right now. Of course, the Agitator is dead, like we mentioned previously. Such a wonderful operator target. But with things like Ronvid and Ballista, I think that JJ may just outweigh him in points, but that Bruiser is waiting to be used.
And again, we see the Mercenary moving your opponent's units and not your own, because we have that marksman with JJ between that Siege Tower and that Ballista. Not something you normally see, but in the end, Muzzle proving to be really, really quite useful for JJ in this whole series.
Yeah, Muzzle just, again, sort of like we mentioned about Iris, Muzzle being one of the feature cards of this tournament so far, just doing absolute work. Of course, Adzakov running it in all of his decks, and JJ doing similar and just playing it a lot. But Marksman, such a great target for it. It adds a little 2 points when you initially steal it, making it a 16-point steal. So you get a sort of pseudo max Muzzle value anyway, and then it blocks the Mercenaries from doing their full potential.
And we also see a Trapper in Game King's hand, which will be a bit countered by that Keira because it can add armor to some of the units in the back, and they won't really play into blocking that Scorch because it will only go up to 10 instead of that 11 that we see with Stellar. So I think it's going to be a pretty good counter to the Trapper in general. I mean, I think JJ can expect the Trapper. He saw it last game. He does see the row stack in the back going on with these Mercenaries from Game King, so I think it'll be a good way to counter some of that damage as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a really great Keira usage just to absolutely negate the damage from that Trapper perfectly. But the Ballista is going to find a little bit of value. That's actually probably going to come down to about a 10 as well, right? Or actually, if the 6 value Trapper is played, it could find 1 extra point. So maybe about an 11 value coming up from this Ballista. Oh, or not, because there we go, Mercenaries. But he's lining it up for the Trapper. JJ knows this. He's seen the Trapper already. He just nods to himself. He knows what's coming. Keira is a fantastic answer. Although, now there's 4 units, the Trapper will do a little bit of damage.
It's interesting because we see obviously 2 Scorches, and there's only 1 good Scorch target that obviously JJ wants to see on the board. And if we see that Scorch coming out, I mean, obviously Game King's not going to play it, but you have to play Bork 3 turns before. You can't play it at the very end. It's not like the card Scorch from hand. So it's going to make it for a bit of an awkward situation between both players to see how that pans out and how we make it so that JJ gets max value from that Bork, which I think he probably won't be able to get.
No, definitely not, especially if this Thunderbolt comes down. I mean, otherwise we could actually potentially, if the Trapper went off, see the highest units on the board be the 11 strength Taylor, and then the 7 strength back row of Game King. So there's a couple of interesting ways that this Scorch can play out. Some of them are very bad for both players, but it'll be interesting to see. He just goes to the Agitator because this is JJ reading the round, right? He just wants to see sort of how the round plays out. He wants to make a more informed decision. So he says, okay, Game King, just show me a little bit more of your plan.
And now we'll probably see Keira coming out, adding some of that armor to the boost. Not only, it plays around that Trapper, so it adds not only the actual point boost from that Thunderbolt potion, but also the armor that negates some of that Trapper value as well.
Absolutely. I mean, but if he plays Villain Trettenworth now, Villain Trettenworth was changed so that it can't Scorch itself. Villain Trettenworth cannot eliminate itself anymore. The high strength units on the board are now 11s and 7s, all on Game King's side of the board. if it goes like JJ is planning, this could be a crazy ending to the game.
Yeah, that's devastating. I mean, obviously Kara couldn't put that Thunderbolt down in time, so obviously couldn't block much of that trapper damage, but this is going to be absolutely huge if he's able to scorch all that back row. I mean, it's going to be a ton of units. I think GameKing knows this, and he can't, I mean, he's just blocked to scorch, I think. He can risk it and you know, scorch himself, but he's just going to get scorched even more in the back row. So GameKing is in a very, very tough position, I think. It's hard to read this, really.
You know the term between a rock and a hard place? That is essentially where GameKing finds himself right now. He's got an 11-point scorch, or potentially open up much worse. But we are going to see Bruverhoog coming out. Bruver, of course, representing a great deal of points. But you just have to be a little careful with what he plays.
Yeah, we're going to see Barclay as, which also strengthens, so maybe not the greatest choice here, although he's going to block some of the damage maybe from the back row as well. In the end, I mean, it makes it so it's not like a triple scorch, but yeah, GameKing's in a very, very tough spot here.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, the best thing is, even though that scorch is blocked, the ballista can fire on those 7s and 6s, and from its second shot, it'll hit 5 targets. So there's a lot of value coming in off that ballista. I believe 15, because it'll be a 4 and a 5. So 15, and then Akira Metz. What for another 15? It's 30 points.
Yeah, I think we're just going to see Kara Metz in the front row, not to boost anything too high. It's really the only way to do it, I think, to make it so you don't, or maybe just boost 2 units actually, just so you can't scorch yourself at all. But yeah, in the end, I think that Scorch is not what GameKing wanted in his hand at the very end. It's a card that can find a lot of value in some situations, but if it's a brick, it's not only like some cards that are dead, just 0-point cards, it's negative points, so you really can't play, you have to pass early, and that makes your plays a lot less reactive as well. So it's, I think, tough for GameKing to maybe bow out of the series this way.
This is such an incredible ending to a game, so remarkably tense and so sort of mechanically in depth as well. All sorts of Scorch blocking going on. Wow, kind of surprised to see him shoot that Taylor, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he's maybe not expecting, or maybe I'm not sure why he would shoot the Taylor. That, I mean, it's going to get scorched anyway by the Bork, so I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe that's the only way he bred to do that, so he can get the multiple scorches on the 7s, for example, with the Bork. But it's hard to read that GameKing has Scorched in his hand anyway, so he couldn't really be playing around that, I think, either.
Yeah, slightly confused by that play, if I'm totally honest. I'm sure that we'll find out the reason later, and it'll be perfectly clear to us. But right now, slightly confused by him choosing to shoot the Taylor there, because that ballista needed to find a lot of value in this game.
I think JJ will be very, very surprised to see Scorch in GameKing's hand. It's not a card you normally see, I think, in these Bruver lists. Although GameKing has been playing it for a few patches, so maybe he does expect it a bit. But in the end here, I mean, it makes it so that GameKing's hand is super awkward, and JJ is going to win this game because of a play like Scorch, for example. I mean, you have to pass there, basically.
Yeah, Akira's going to be enough. Just probably going down on the front row. Won't block the Scorch, or on the mid row, that's fine too. So, yeah, there we go. JJ is just... Oh my god, that's why he did it! 4 million IQ play from Super JJ. Oh my goodness, look at his face. He knows. Absolutely stunning end to this game. Oh my goodness, the emotions show in his face. Incredible play by Super JJ.
The fact we couldn't even notice that just shows the skill level at these that these players are playing at. Obviously, JJ hit that Fowler to bring it out to 10 so you can get the quad Scorch with that Borg play at the very end. And I mean, obviously, it makes GameKing Scorch in hand. Obviously, Daddy couldn't play that last card, which is a big disadvantage. In the end, that was a crazy finish to this game. I think no one expected that. Very, very high skill swing between these two players. It came down to the very end. I mean, a 3-2 series is something you always want to see, I think.